Retro Road Test, Ford Granada vs Vauxhall Carlton, 1990 Road Test, 2.0-litre. If you grew up in Britain in the late 80s and early 90s, the sight of a Granada or a Carlton going about its respectable, middle management business was as common as a biscuit tin in a council house. Both cars were the unspoken backbone of British family life and company fleets, conservative, dependable, and designed to get you where you needed to be without fuss or drama. This is a long, affectionate road test pitting the Ford Granada, MKIII, the one that looks like it spends weekends reading the Financial Times, against the Vauxhall Carlton, MK3/Opel Recordie based, with a look that says I'm economical, yet I can be useful at an emergency DIY job. Both are fitted with 2.0-litre petrol engines for the purposes of this test, the kind of power plant that, in 1990, said adequate rather than exhilarating. I've driven them back to back on a mixture of A roads, B roads, and the inevitable dual carriageway, and tried to imagine the lives of owners who bought them brand new to ferry families, tow small trailers and occasionally fetch a Sunday roast. Here's what I found. Quick character sketches. Ford Granada, 1985-1994 MKIII, 2.0 petrol. The Granada is old-school refinement trying modern manners. It's big in the way a comfortable sofa is big, welcoming, slightly overstuffed, and built to last. It makes no attempt at youthfulness and proudly embraces the status of someone sensible owns me. The 2.0 engine is the sensible choice, not the briskest, but it suits the car's ethos. The steering and suspension are tuned for calm, not cornering heroics. Vauxhall Carlton, 1986-1994 MK3, 2.0 petrol. The Carlton, sister to the Opel Rekord, presents itself as pragmatic and slightly more austere. Where the Granada wants to flatter you with soft ride and cosseting seats, the Carlton prefers to be straightforward and functional. It has a slightly tauter feel, and the 2.0 motor in Vauxhall Tune tends to feel a touch livelier when you ask for progress, but don't expect fireworks. Specification and equipment, 1990, UK spec, 2.0 engines. I'll keep this as representative rather than a laundry list of every trim level, because both models had several variants in 1990. Engine. Both are 2.0-litre inline-4 petrol units. In period tune they typically produced around 100-115 bhp depending on carburetor forward/injection and state of tune. That put them in the adequate for family use bracket rather than sports car territory. Transmission, 5-speed manual as standard on most 2.0 variants, with an automatic available as an option, usually a 3-speed auto. Manuals are recommended if you value economy and involvement. Brakes, front discs, rear drums, typical of the era for these classes, with servo assistance. ABS was not standard and would have been a high-cost option, or not available on many trims. Suspension, McPherson struts up front on both, with a relatively conventional live forward/independent setup at the rear that favored ride comfort over handling precision. Interior kit, expect cloth trim as standard, with leather and higher grade fabrics on nicer spec levels. Central locking, electric windows and a decent sound system could be present on higher spec Granadas and Carltons. Fleets often went for the more basic specification to keep costs down. Practicality, both have a capacious boot and sensible family car dimensions. The Granada's interior tends to feel more commodious and more comfortable for long journeys. Bear in mind, in 1990, manufacturers still left a fair amount of kit off the base cars. If you want power steering, tinted glass, stereo with cassette and proper carpet, you might well have had to tick some boxes. Exterior styling and road presence. Granada. The MKII Granada wears its Volvo-like seriousness with comfort. It has a swooping, long bonnet, large greenhouse and an imposing three-box silhouette that says, "I imagine I will often be in charge of someone else's parking." From the outside it looks more executive than the Carlton, an impression helped by some optional chrome trim and those broad bumpers. It's the kind of car that used to be specified with a wood trim interior and a remit to chauffeur accountants. Carlton. The Carlton's lines are more angular and purposeful. It looks a touch more modern, for 1990, and perhaps slightly more Germanic and efficient. If the Granada is wearing a tweed jacket, the Carlton is in a sensible suit. It's less showy and a little more understated, which, depending on taste, could be an advantage. On the road, neither car will draw admiring glances from petrol heads, but both project competence, the Granada with a dignified, conservative swagger, the Carlton with tidy, workman-like assurance. Interior, feel, ergonomics and comfort. Granada cabin. Step inside a Granada and you're greeted by large, supportive seats that were designed for motorway miles. The seating position is commanding rather than sporty, and visibility is generally good. Controls are straightforward and placed in familiar Ford fashion, big switches, readable dials, and no puzzles. The dashboard materials are serviceable and wear well. Ford knew how to make something feel robust even when it wasn't plush. For long-distance comfort the Granada wins points. The seats cushion lumps in the road, the insulation keeps wind and road noise fairly muted, and the heating forward/ventilation is abundant, a must on British A roads when the weather behaves like a soggy teenager. Carlton cabin. The Carlton's interior is utilitarian, but in the best possible sense. Everything is functional and uncluttered. The seats are firm rather than pillowy, which makes them feel more supportive on twisty B roads and less soporific on long motorway legs. Switchgear and instrument layout are sensible, the plastics are hard but durable. Where the Granada feels like lounging, the Carlton feels like doing business. Rear legroom is good in both cars, and both offer large boots that will swallow pushchairs, grocery shopping and the occasional over-optimistic DIY purchase. Driving impressions, engine, gearbox, and general manners. Engine and performance. With the 2.0-litre under the bonnet, neither car is quick, but both deliver adequate mid-range shove for overtaking on the A road. The Granada's engine pulls with a steady, unhurried tempo. You ask for progress, and it obliges in a very civilized manner. It's torquey enough at lower revs that you seldom feel obliged to be on the throttle constantly. The Carlton's 2.0 feels slightly crisper and a little more willing to rev hit the overtake, and the Carlton tends to feel more eager to make the move. The trade-off is that it can feel a touch more nervous at the limit compared with the Granada's sofa-like composure. Neither car will break any sprint records, both are about cruising comfortably at legal motorway speeds and making steady progress on rural roads. Gearbox. The 5-speed manual in both cars is typical of the period, mechanical, direct and long-legged. Gear changes are predictable rather than tactile poetry. They clunk occasionally if you're not smooth, but they're reliable. The Granada's gearbox feels slightly more forgiving in town traffic. It's programmed for ease, not drama. The Carlton's gear change is acceptably precise and feels more mechanical, which some drivers will prefer. If you want an automatic, both manufacturers offered torque converter boxes. The automatics are fine for lazy commuting, but they sap performance and economy, and in 1990 they weren't as slick as modern autos. Economy and refinement. In 1990 you could expect mid to high 30s miles per gallon on a steady run in either car with a manual, maybe less in town driving. The Granada is marginally better at masking wind noise and road vibration, feeling more refined at motorway pace. The Carlton, while tidy, tends to transmit a bit more mechanical sound into the cabin, especially under load. Handling and ride. The Granada's suspension tuning favors ride comfort. It glides over imperfections, settling couples into a cozy rhythm, and is more likely to absorb potholes rather than report them. On twisty lanes the body roll is noticeable. The Granada is not shy about reminding you it prefers roundabouts to hairpins. The Carlton, conversely, is a bit firmer. It indulges sharper turn-in and rewards a brisk pace with more confidence. Because the Carlton's responses are slightly more immediate, you feel more engaged on a country road, but the ride can be a touch choppier over broken surfaces. Steering on both is light at low speeds, helpful for parking, and progressively weightier on faster roads. Neither offers sports car feedback, but the Carlton delivers a touch more communicative steering overall. Safety and equipment, as expected in 1990. In 1990, safety features like airbags and ABS were not universal extras in this class. If you're comparing two middle-sized saloons, you'd be realistic to expect seat belts all round, standard. Driver's airbag, possibly available as an option on higher Granada specs, and similarly patchy on the Carlton. ABS, rare as standard, likely an option on top trims or fleet extras. Structural integrity, both cars are robust by the standards of their time, but modern safety levels, think multiple airbags, ISOFIX mounts, crumple zones engineered to modern standards, are obviously absent. Both manufacturers offered higher trim levels that improved safety and convenience, but beware that a base 1990 example will not match modern safety expectations. Practicality, ownership and running costs. Both cars were conceived to be practical and economical to own. Boot and space, generous in both. The Granada's boot opening is wide and the floor low, meaning awkward shopping bags or a small coffin, kidding, mostly, are easily accommodated. Rear passenger space is generous in both cars for adults. Maintenance, parts for both models were relatively cheap and widely available in 1990. Mechanics were familiar with Ford and Vauxhall /Opel engines, so servicing was straightforward. Insurance groups for 2.0 Granadas and Carltons were sensible by the standards of the day. Drivers paid for size and weight more than hooligan performance. Resale and longevity, both cars were built to last if maintained. Rust can be an issue on older examples. Take care to check sills, wheel arches and the underbody on any surviving 1990 car today. Electrically both are simple, fewer modules, fewer headaches, but remember age brings perished wiring and corroded connectors. Comfort extras and creature comforts. In 1990, neither car was trying to compete with luxury saloons, but both offered a range of extras to soften the experience. Heating and ventilation, effective in both. The Granada's climate control, if fitted, adds to the feeling of executive comfort. Sound system, expect a cassette player on many cars. Upgraded stereos were offered and make a big difference if you like music without Tinium-style sound. Seating, Granada often wins for the long-distance seat thanks to thicker cushioning. Carlton is firmer and more supportive for active driving. Practical comparisons in day-to-day use. City and shopping run. In town the Granada's softer suspension and forgiving low-speed manners make it easy to live with. The Carlton's slightly firmer chassis and more purposeful gearbox make it brisker around town but a fraction less cushioned over speed bumps. Motorway cruising. Granada takes the victory here. It's stable, better insulated and less inclined to transmit wind noise into the cabin. Cruise comfortably at 70-80 miles per hour and consume petrol, at a steady rate while the seat cradles you. B roads and country lanes. Carlton enjoys this environment more. Its firmer setup and sharper steering make it more entertaining if you like to hustle. The Granada will cope perfectly well, you'll just do it in a gentler fashion. The little things that matter. Visibility. Both cars have large windows and straightforward mirrors. Reversing is easier than in many modern cars with small rear glass. Switchgear, logical in both. Granadas sometimes come with ergonomically friendlier switches. Ford liked big, reachable knobs. Heating speed, both warm up at reasonable speed. The Granada's heater tends to be less shouty and more evenly distributed. Boot lid springs and load lip, both generally sensible. Carlton sometimes feels a touch more industrial and practical. Cost of ownership in a nutshell, 1990 mindset. If this was 1990 and you were buying new, the Granada and Carlton offered similar running costs. Fuel economy, service intervals and insurance would be broadly comparable for the 2.0 variants. Both were aimed at the sensible motorist rather than thrill seekers. If you're reading this in 2025, or later, owning a classic Granada or Carlton as a budget classic can be economical if you're handy with a spanner and willing to accept modest creature comforts alongside a generous portion of character. Quirks and common annoyances. Ford Granada, some owners noted fuel pump issues on older examples, and electrics can go moody if a wiring loom has been chewed by time. Expect creaks and groans from interior trim on higher mileage cars. Vauxhall Carlton, sometimes temperamental electrics and perished interior foams are the Achilles heel. The Carlton's ride can get firm over time if bushes haven't been replaced. Both can develop the benign but irritating maladies of anything 30+ years old, loosening trim, sun-faded upholstery, and that indefinable smell of a decade gone by. Who should buy which? Buy a Granada if you value motorway comfort above all. You like a softer ride, large comfortable seats and the image of a sensible executive conveyance. You sometimes have elderly relatives in the car and want them to arrive at their destination without a protest. Buy a Carlton if you enjoy a slightly livelier driving feel and prefer a tauter chassis. You appreciate Germanic straightforwardness and a car that handles a brisk pace without pretending to be sporty. You like things that are practical and get the job done with no fuss. Verdict, which wins? This is a little like asking whether tea or coffee is better, both are excellent at different things. If I had to pick one for a time warp daily driver in 1990, outfitted with a 2.0 engine, my pick would depend on how you drive. For long, comfortable motorway miles, the Ford Granada has the edge. It's the car you'd pick if you commute long distances and prefer a gentle ride and relaxed refinement. For active country roads and a slightly more engaging drive, the Vauxhall Carlton wins a slim advantage. It's the more honest, slightly sprier car that won't coddle you quite as much. If pressed for a single winner for overall appeal in 1990 Britain, I'd give it to the Granada, only by a whisker, because it does what this class of car was most often bought for: carry people and luggage quietly, reliably and without fuss. But if you enjoy driving a little and want a car with a firmer attitude, the Carlton will make you smile in places where the Granada will merely nod approvingly. Final thoughts, and a small confession. Driving these cars now feels a bit like stepping into someone else's sensible slippers, comfortable, familiar and just a little bit retro. They are not exciting in a headline-grabbing way, but that was never the point. The Granada and Carlton both embody a particular, reliable British motoring ethic, practical, no-nonsense and slightly plummy. If you're after nostalgia, practicality and a car that will patch along for years with a bit of attention, either will give you a good time. If you're after thrills, well, buy a hot hatch for weekends and keep one of these for the school run and the soggy supermarket trips. And if you ever catch yourself comparing the two in a car park while sipping a thermos of tea from the boot, you're probably already halfway to loving both for different reasons. So there you have it, two great, sensible choices from 1990, each with its virtues. The Granada is the croissant and the Carlton is the sturdy slice of brown bread. Both will fill you up, but one feels more like a treat.